Today is a cloudy, kind of humid September 10th, 2025. I'm in new territory. This is Frederick, Maryland, the Marc station, which was built in 2001. I'm gonna wait for a train to arrive from Washington, D.C. Stub End Terminal here at Frederick. They run 3 trains a day each way on Monday through Fridays. All right, we're at the Washington end of the platform here at Frederick as Marc train 891 is approaching. He's running a bit early. He's doing it 5:29. I got 5:18. He's got an MP36 PH-3C. Service began here to Frederick on December 17th, 2001. And the equipment's heading into the yard. I don't exactly know where it is, but there are 2 more trains that are coming in from DC. Well, today is a sunny September 11th, 2025. Remember the World Trade Center, 2001. This is the Harpers Ferry train station used by Marc and Amtrak. This station was built in 1889 along the tracks of the old Baltimore and Ohio. Looking east, the tracks cross the Potomac River into Maryland. That high ground over there is Maryland Heights. Here also the Shenandoah line comes in, heading to Winchester, Virginia on the right. At 8:43, we got a westbound and an eastbound coming. Empty trash train. Thank God it's not 90 degrees and it's loaded. Should have an eastbound coming as well. Eastbound at 8:52. Nice horn. K3L it sounds like. SD75 high on the point. Oh, here's the inside of the Harpers Ferry station. Fireplace. And on the wall here is the station's architect, E. Francis Baldwin. He's the same guy who designed the Point of Rock station to the east that we'll see later. I was here back in the 1970s, I think 1977. And at least until the 80s, they had a block operator working in this building. I think it worked at this end of the building. Here is the John Brown Monument. John Brown was an abolitionist. He was captured here in Harpers Ferry back in 1859 by the United States Marine Corps. And this is where John Brown was captured by the United States Marines in 1859. I haven't really walked much on the Appalachian Trail, but I'd have a lot of work to do if I wanted to walk the entire trail from end to end. On the Maryland side, in Maryland Heights, across the CSX Metropolitan sub, is what's called the Salty Dog Tavern. Supposedly a tavern from the Civil War era, I believe. But supposedly it's not called the Salty Dog, it's the Stonehouse Tavern. Well, you hear about many tri-state areas where we're definitely at one right here. Where I'm standing is in West Virginia. Over there is Maryland. And on the other side of the Shenandoah River is Virginia, Loudoun Heights, Virginia. 3 states, 1, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland. There's Maryland Heights with the Shenandoah Line Bridge in the foreground. If you look up on the rock outcropping, you can just barely see The Menon's bath powder emblem. It's badly faded though, but it's there. Here's a better look at the Harpers Ferry Depot with Maryland Heights in the background. And we got a westbound at 1043.
That third unit is a BNSF GP39M number 2809. It's a former Union Pacific GP30 number 830 built in 1962. It's dead in train and I'm told it's headed for a short line. the rest of this train is a long cut of loaded molten sulfur tank cars. It likely connected off of a Canadian railroad in Chicago. This train will be yarded ahead in Brunswick to get a new crew. We'll catch it again later at Point of Rocks.
This isn't scheduled railroading at its best or worst, depending on your point of view. Guy coming off the Shenandoah line at 11:45. Coming off the Shenandoah line heading east towards Brunswick and beyond. Well, because of that rock train that came off the Shenandoah line, the ranger advised the passengers that Amtrak 41 from Chicago to Miami, the Floridian, is going to be stopping on that track. Here comes Amtrak. I think he's going to be on the track on the right. Got a limited clear signal up there.
Oh, here comes Amtrak number 41, the Floridian, en route from Chicago to Miami. I think most people would prefer it remain the Capital Limited.
Here comes 41, 11:58.
Side you want to be on.
I'm sure those boarding passengers aren't happy having to go down and upstairs to get on the proper track to board the train.
All right, he's moving up. This train has gone through a lot of metamorphosis since Amtrak started. Well, this has been running shortly after Amtrak started. It used to be 440 from Pittsburgh to Washington, Capital Limited. Then it became the Capital Limited Train 40 from Chicago to Washington. Now it's Amtrak Train 41 from Chicago to Miami, and it's been renamed the Floridian.
Well, today, U-liner sleepers are a regular sight on this line between Pittsburgh and Washington. U-liners were typically not standard equipment on the Capital Limited.
We've now moved east to Brunswick, Maryland. And this is the B&O station here at Brunswick, used by Marc. It was built in 1891. Well, stopped here in the yard in Brunswick is M419, a manifest train from Cumberland to Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Interesting consist on them. The trailing unit is a former Union Pacific GP30, now a BNSF GP39M. Huge train. He's got a couple of Department of Defense cars on it. He's got a load of molten sulfur cars in the back of the DPU. Well, east of the grade crossing and station here is WB Tower. It's an old B&O tower that was built in 1910. It was south of the westbound mains, and then it was moved to this position in 2022. Looks like they're working on building enhancing the railroad park here. They built a new deck on both levels. Well, M419 crew has gone off duty. They might have reached their hours of service, but I get a kick out of what's trailing on this train. Former Union Pacific GP30, now a GP39M, being towed dead in train. Maybe it's going to a short line someplace. Got a westbound intermodal at 229. I think this is I-135 out of Suffolk, Virginia.
This I-135 handles steamship company containers out of the Tidewater region of Norfolk, Virginia to Chicago. It competes with Norfolk Southern with that same type of business on that same routing. Now, the number 135 has an interesting history on CSX. The number, if you trace it back, although the routings have changed somewhat, goes all the way back to the B&O Chicago trailer jet. which ran between Philadelphia and Chicago. Now, this 135 wasn't always used on this Tidewater to Chicago route. Prior to that, it was actually a Chambersburg, Pennsylvania to Chicago intermodal train before it was renumbered to Q015, and to today, it's I015. The intermodal trains on CSX have that I prefix. Now, the 135, before it ran out of Chambersburg, was a Philadelphia to Chicago intermodal train, the Q135. Before that, it was symbolized on CSX as the R135. And prior to CSX coming into business on the Baltimore and Ohio, it was the Chicago Trailer Jet. Those distributed power units remind us of precision scheduled railroading, the philosophy of running fewer and longer trains. You can see that Mediterranean Shipping Corp is the biggest customer on this train with their tan containers. Now, there used to be an intermodal train that ran out of Baltimore to Chicago. That was suspended when the clearance work started on the Howard Street Tunnel in Baltimore. I'm told that construction will be completed on September the 26th, and soon after they should reinstate those Baltimore to Chicago intermodal trains. They used to be symboled Q137 and Q138, westbound and eastbound respectively.
We move further east to a very popular railfanning spot. We're just west of the Point of Rocks station in Point of Rocks, Maryland. We're at the C&O Canal Park recreational area. What's been following the railroad is the C&O Canal bicycle hiking trail. Runs along this Potomac River, goes all the way down to Washington, D.C. Got an eastbound at Point of Rocks at 350. This should be M419. Count the cars on this sucker. It's long. Two gigantic trains. That eastbound M419, not counting the DPUs, he had 204 cars. Not sure what that train was, but it might have been one of those other Rocky Mount to Cumberland trains. I'll have to look that up. At 418, we have a westbound CSX with quite a bit of power on them. Nice K5LA. I noticed that a number of these CSX trains have what sounds like hybrid K5LAs, like the Acela Expresses. They sound nice. Well, the Acela Express horns sound nice, a hell of a lot better than those stinky horns on those next gens. All right, time is 4:36. Approaching is the leader of the Marc rush hour. Marc train 873 en route from Washington, D.C. to Brunswick. Just pulled out of Point of Rock Station and a ton of people got off. It's got an MP36PH-3C and some Sumitomo cars. I'll tell you, Marc, just like Virginia Railway Express, their cab car horns sound better than their locomotive horns. Ay, ay, ay. It's usually just the opposite. And there is the pièce de résistance of the day, the Point of Rock station, built by E. Francis Baldwin back in 1873. Well, here's Marc 891. He's going to swing off the Y and head towards Frederick. Just to give you the lay of the land here at Point of Rocks, it's a junction of two CSX subdivisions. Track on the left is the CSX Old Main subdivision to Baltimore, and the track on the right is the Metropolitan subdivision to Washington. Well, you can see that rail fans like this building. There's another rail fan just west of the junction here. Approaching is 875 of Marc. It runs from Washington, D.C. all the way out to Martinsburg, West Virginia. That's a 73-mile trip. All right, arriving is train 875 at 5:28. Approaching at 6:05 is Marc train 877, Washington, D.C. to Brunswick. Not too far behind, maybe on the other track will be Amtrak 40, the Floridian from Miami to Chicago. He's about an hour and 25 minutes late. No more superliners on that train, and it's not called the Capital Limited anymore. And it's 40 going west. It used to be 40 going east before this route extension. Marc does a brisk business here at Point of Rocks. 6:11, here comes Amtrak 40. Here, a little ways south of the railroad crossing here at Point of Rocks is the C&O Canal bicycle and hiking path. This path runs from Cumberland, Maryland to Washington, D.C. It's about 184 miles long. Well, at 6:50, we have an eastbound CSX creeping down the track here. He's got a clear signal at Point of Rocks, heading for the Old Main Subdivision. This looks like a loaded coal train. He's heading straight east on the Old Main towards Baltimore. I expected to see Marc 879 from Washington to Brunswick, but that train was canceled for tonight. Well, we're back at the Marc station of Point of Rocks. Gonna get one more train. Here he comes, train 881 from Washington to Martinsburg, West Virginia. This train will be loaded with people because the previous train, the Brunswick 879, was canceled. Time is 7:34 p.m. Beautiful day, great day. Saw lots of CSX trains, Marc trains, and the 2 Floridians on CSX's Cumberland and Metropolitan subdivisions.